Hello everyone. Today I wanted to talk about maintenance on fuel tanks and carburetors on your typical Briggs and Stratton 3.5 horse engine, which you typically find on the cheaper Mower mowers or MTD. A lot of these were made, a lot of them are still around, and I find that they usually last better than more expensive mowers like Craftsman's. A lot of that is the alcohol that's in gasoline now, and the fact that the cheaper Briggs engines use a plastic carburetor that's not susceptible to corrosion. So what you're going to need to do this maintenance is a flat and Phillips screwdriver. I like to have some sort of a pick, pliers, socket wrench, extension, an 8 and a 13 millimeter socket, and also a solvent of your choice. I'm using gasoline, but there are safer alternatives. Gasoline's not really recommended. The first thing that I do when I go to work on a mower is I pull the spark plug wire and I ground it against the chassis so that we don't have this thing trying to fire over. So what I do after that is I take my flat blade screwdriver and I remove the screw that holds the air cleaner on and set that to the side. Then at that point I grab my socket wrench, my extension, and my 13 millimeter socket, and I remove the bolt that's in between the carburetor and the filler neck. Once that's removed, there's one other bolt that needs to come out, and that is your 8 millimeter bolt that is on the front bracket. So once that one's out, you can pull back on the fuel tank to separate the O-ring that's inside of the tube between the carburetor and the cylinder. What you need to do now is at the top for the butterfly assembly, there's a rod that connects to it. I usually grab that with pliers and then twist the fuel tank down and out to pull that loose. Now, one of the things that you need to be aware of is the fuel tanks are metal, and so the alcohol and gasoline attracts water and it will rust your fuel tank, and this fuel tank is quite rusted inside. So I frequently have to take this carburetor off and clean everything up to make sure it's working correctly. While I have the fuel cap off, one thing to be aware of, if you're running your mower and it starts spurting gas out when you make turns, you may have lost the little fiber disc that goes in here. You can get that from your local Briggs and Stratton supplier or order it off the internet. So now that we have the fuel tank and the carburetor off, we'll separate the carburetor from the fuel tank. Now the reason that we're doing this, if your mower likes to die frequently and it still has fuel in it, or if it surges back and forth, you can either have an issue with dirty fuel, contaminated fuel, or a bad gasket in between the carburetor and the fuel tank. And pulling this off will let us know if we have either one of those issues. So what I like to do once I have the screws loose is I just take a tool of some kind and tap around. If you've never had the carburetor off your fuel tank, it will be attached, the gasket will be attached to both fairly well and won't want to come loose. So what we have now, you can see that this gasket is loose. This gasket is also in very bad shape. It's delaminated, and so it leaks air, and that's one of the things that will lead to a surging issue. So you can get this gasket as part of a rebuild kit from your local Briggs and Stratton supplier, lawnmower shop, off of Amazon, whatever you prefer. If you do take this gasket off, don't lose the spring that's in this area. So now that you have that apart, If you've decided not to remove the gasket, that's fine. You need to look at this screen and this screen. This screen is not removable, but you can clean it with a solvent. This screen is removable. And if you pull it off and look at it, you may see that it's very dirty. And one of the things that I do, will just go ahead and pitch that in the solvent. And a lot of times, I'll just pitch pretty much everything in there. There needs to be a washer in between the carburetor and the air cleaner. If there's not, you're leaking dirty air into your system. It's going to tear things up. One thing to look at is down in the throat of your carburetor. If it's very, very dirty in there, then you have been leaking dirty air into it. Go ahead and clean it up. One thing you can do is, if you have a container big enough, you can just put the whole carburetor in the solvent and let it soak. I'll go ahead and at least put the screws in there. That container is not large enough to fit the whole carburetor. Another thing to look at is this rubber elbow. A lot of times it is split along the seam, and if it is, then that will also pull dirty air into your carburetor. I go ahead and throw that in there, but I don't leave it in there for long. Check your bulb to make sure your bulb doesn't have holes in it. If you need to replace your bulb, replacement units are available, and I'll cover that in a future video. So once you've done that, you can take a look at your fuel tank, and what we just covered here covers surging when it hunts back and forth between various speeds. If it doesn't like to stay running, if it bogs down very easily, if it dies for no reason, what you can look at in this bowl area, if there's a lot of sediment in there, then either your fuel is very dirty or your tank is rusty. And by cleaning all this up, you can restore the mower to operation for a while. There are solutions out there, mostly for older automotive applications like classic cars, where you can pour an etchant into the tank and then pour in a substance that basically coats the inside of your fuel tank with a gasoline-resistant plastic. Or you can see if you could find a tank that's not rusty, and just make sure that you don't leave gas sitting in it. Run the mower all the way out of gas, or put some sort of stabilizer in there that keeps the gasoline from getting wet. While you have the fuel tank off, I also recommend getting in here and cleaning all the fins. This is an air-cooled engine, and if these fins are dirty, then this engine can overheat and have a lot of problems. Well, that basically covers what you need to look at, what parts you might need to replace. One more thing to cover, make sure you have your O-ring in here. If you don't, get another one. So that pretty much covers it. And in a future video, we'll cover some other maintenance activities that can be done on these mowers. But like I said at the beginning, I have found that these mowers, if you take care of them, are fairly reliable. Most of the time, the only thing I have to do is take the carburetor off, replace some of the gaskets, clean the fuel tank out, and replace wheels every once in a while. Other than that, these are good, solid mowers, and I like them a lot. So if you have any questions or comments, put them down below. And I hope you found this video informative, and I also hope you have a great day. Thanks for watching.